Well, here we are, and the gang's all here for another episode of HIAC Wrestling Podcast. I invented Indie Wrestling Podcast. Didn't you know? That's total sarcasm. The three people that were involved in that conversation with that guy from Florida will understand that pun. I'm the Bob Average comedian, Dan Calachico. Welcome to a new episode 445. Sure. Yeah, no, 4 it comes after 5 comes after 4. I got it. With me as always is Craig Legans, and returning to talk shop at the beginning of the show, ladies and gentlemen, OmegaSquad Chris Green. Hello, boys. And before we get started, I want to say that we're going to talk about NWA Power. We're going to talk about the Friday Night SmackDown debut and the other wrestling that's been on TV since at length. We're going to talk about how Craig and I feel, which we don't know how each other feel, about the end of HIAC, and I mean the pay-per-view, Hell in a Cell. So we're going to hold on to that. Of course, we got wrestling historian in between that, but first I wanted to bring any excuse I can find to bring OmegaSquad in, because I have to come up with a good one to get him on, because I can't go, hey, Chris, you want to do the show? Outside of the 4 we've agreed to, and he'll just go, no. But if I give him a reason, he'll come on, and that reason
we have a contractual arrangement, Mr. Calachico.
Yes, exactly. I have to rework that for next year, for the 2020 season. But there was a sort of a big deal that did happen on Friday Night SmackDown. Started on Raw when Brock Lesnar? No, that's not his name. Brock Lesnar beat the holy hell out of Rey Mysterio, and then beat the holy hell out of his son Dominic, which I thought it was Eddie Guerrero's son. Kayfabe, guys. We'll talk about Eddie Guerrero later. I assume that's an assumption, a big assumption for the wrestling historian, because today especially is a day about Eddie Guerrero. We'll talk about that later. I know he's probably nodding, but as you can see on the video podcast, we have technical difficulties right now, so I'm assuming that Craig is going, yes, stupid, I have it, I'm ready. But cut to Friday, and at the end of the show, here, let's talk about this first, because we're going to talk about this in succinction, chronological order, other words that I can mess up. I'm sure Chris will correct me when it's his turn. Kofi Kingston, Brock Lesnar met in the ring, and less than 8 seconds later, it was over for Kofi Kingston. And I will say this, Craig, I'll go to you first. That was a hell of a run for Kofi. It was a good run. I wish it went longer, and I wish it kind of ended not that way in the face of certain prejudices and opinions. It was kind of a shoddy way to go, in my opinion, but you cannot take anything away from Kofi Kingston, a guy who was told even earlier this year he would never be champion, was the WWE champion, and he had I think he had a fine run.
His run was longer than former champions and Hall of Famers, Edge, Randy Orton, any of the Rock's reigns, and Jinder Mahal. He had and in today's climate of professional wrestling, holding a title from from WrestleMania all the way past SummerSlam is quite an achievement. And, almost to Survivor Series. So, yes, he should be very happy and very proud. And, again, we hate the way it ended, obviously. Just not unlike, not to put either of these men in the same sentence or in the same category, but still the longest reigning Intercontinental Championship reign of all time ended in 30 seconds. So it's along those lines. Kofi had an incredible run for a guy that'd been with the company for 11 years and was finally given the opportunity, and he proved himself time and time again. It does, obviously beg the question why 3 F5s couldn't put Seth Rollins down, but one can put Kofi down in under 10 seconds. But that's for better minds to ponder than ours. But and obviously it was to set up something else. That's my other problem, not with the loss or with the speed of the loss, but it's to set up another of Brock's opponents. And echoing what was said, this morning on the WWE Bounce, oh great, now we have another champion that'll be around for only 2 months at a time.
Yeah,
So,
I'll get Chris's thoughts in a second because then it'll bleed into the reason I brought Mr. Squad on in the first place. I know it's not always about the one person or the other, but that baffles me when you have such a good run that you're like, okay, well, you're no longer important enough. It's off you. We'll go into this other thing. What that does for him, even with an incredible run as it was, it's hard for me, Chris, to not feel that it still hurt it at the end with a loss like that.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it.
Sure.
The end of Kofi's reign, does seem somewhat ignominious. It's not certainly not going to be, his shining hour. But I think we all know what it was in service of. It was clearly in service of making Brock Lesnar look like the Beast again. Brock really needed the win more than Kofi needed to look strong there, because Kofi will be popular tomorrow.
Sure.
And Brock, if you're reestablishing Brock as a badass to a network audience, I get it. From a business standpoint, I get it. But I agree with Craig a bit. It doesn't necessarily have to sacrifice your heavyweight champion who has had this tremendous run through this whole year. He's had 9 months of a great 2019. To have him jobbed out in 10 seconds is a little much to me. I would have preferred a distraction or something like that Kofi would have been able to save face a little bit. But I get it. It was in service of a probably a shorter term goal of making Brock look like the Beast again. And it's not, again, I get the business decision, but
a free for all question. Either one of you can jump in on this and then reply. The other one can reply when that first person's done. I know it probably doesn't matter from the corporate standpoint, but I really feel it validated all these little, I'm trying not to use trigger words, all these armchair bookers who did nothing but crap on Kofi Kingston for one reason or the other, whether it was color or ability, because it came up every time, annoyingly. I feel that kind of ass whooping on national TV on a debut, on a season premiere like that, is kind of a slap in the face for the whole thing and validates these pricks who did nothing but crap on him the entire run of his title reign. Whoever wants to jump in and agree or disagree, go for it.
I agree. It does crap on his entire title run. And the critics will say, "Well, see, told you."
That's what I mean.
You shouldn't have had him in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's completely unfair and completely biased. If you had a problem with Kofi being champion or having it for 9 months, that's completely out of your control. And I'm sure there's other people that I've had lots of problems being champion. Brock Lesnar, chief among them. But if Brock, were these same people were upset when Brock lost in 30 seconds to Goldberg? Is that what they prefer?
I
hope not. Hey, Chris.
But it always comes around to that, right? That's a great point about, every once in a while, you got to have your champion losing quickly for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't think Kofi's really hurt by this, quite frankly. I think he's going to go out of 2019 as one of the top guys in the company. Now, whether he'll long term be top guy in the company remains to be seen. Surely we can all quote guys who had their run at the top and then have gone by the wayside since then. But I think Kofi and the New Day as a group will continue to be popular, and I think it was fine to me. If you take a step back and say, okay, look at Kofi's run and say, looking back at 2018, did we see this coming? Did we see him winning in WrestleMania? Did we see him going to be a champion for 9 months? We wouldn't have said that this time last year. I think he has to take that win and go for it. And if this caps his career, what else are you going to say about Kofi? He's had a tremendous career.
That's a good point, Chris. What else could the man do that he hasn't? Half the roster won't do a third of what he did. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. I didn't think of that, and that's why I brought it up. Which brings us to, again, the reason Mr. OmegaSquad is here. There was a hell of a debut. It's one of those names where if you even are on the fringe or on the fringe of the fringe like I am with UFC. In fact, for years, the only reason why I knew who anybody was or what the win-loss record was listening to Dean Dixon and the present company, Chris Green, talk about the UFC every week when it was a super show on HIAC show. It was 4 hours a night, 3 interviews, wrestling, and MMA. The good old days.
the good old days.
When I had 4 hours to kill and I didn't want to not talk to anybody, it's like, all right, I want to go. Let's go. A debut of debuts, live on the first episode on SmackDown on Fox. Cain Velasquez was there to beat the holy hell out of Brock Lesnar and to vindicate the destruction of Dominic, because apparently Cain Velasquez, according to Rey Mysterio, is the godfather of Dominic. So, first of all, how did the debut feel for you, Chris? And use your vast knowledge of MMA and UFC to tell us and other people who might not know who the hell this big, huge man is. Who the hell is Cain Velasquez?
So Cain Velasquez is a former 2-time UFC heavyweight champion. He is the guy who dethroned Brock Lesnar back in 2010 in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It was a dominant win.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. It was you look up that fight, because there is a point where Cain pops Brock in the face and Brock kind of does this little like barrel roll to get back up. There's a GIF out there. Just you search for it. It's out there. This is the guy who was the top of the heap of the heavyweight division in the UFC. He was widely spoken of for a period of time as potentially the best heavyweight of all time. But he has had a lot of injuries in his career. He hasn't fought a ton in the last 5 years. He's actually only had 3 fights since 2013. He's not had a great run of trying to get over injuries and fight again. And he hasn't been actually fighting that much. His last fight, we lost by TKO in 26 seconds to Francis Ngannou, who is an up-and-coming UFC heavyweight. He's been around. Cain is one of these guys. He's super athletic. He was known in the UFC for having cardio for days.
Wow. And
he brings an interesting physique and skill set to professional wrestling. And beyond that, his Mexican heritage, he is already a known name amongst Latin American audiences. UFC used him quite a bit for that level of promotion. So you can start to see why Vince McMahon and the WWE were interested in a guy who is that friggin' tall and can do some really athletic things, as I think some people have seen in AAA and whatever else he's been at. He is a big, fast dude, right?
Yeah.
And he comes in with an immediate history, immediate pedigree as a UFC champion, a la Ronda Rousey, a la Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
And he does have a legit win over Brock Lesnar in the UFC. So clearly, this is a way for WWE to try to gain some level of casual fan, at least those who are familiar with UFC, to make it to really make a splash on Friday nights. And I think it's an interesting signing. I think that Cain doesn't. I don't know how his promo ability is. His interviews in the Octagon were always fine for MMA interviews. He certainly knows his way around a promo, at least from a a sit down video type thing.
Sure.
So we'll just have to see how he plays in the ring with Brock as far in a scripted fight. How does it go? Going to be interesting. I think it was a shock to me that WWE pulled the trigger on a guy who hasn't been doing professional wrestling for very long. So
what do you mean for very long? How long is it? I didn't think he was doing any.
Yeah, I don't think he's done much at all except for a couple of appearances.
So, how did the debut go for you? A guy who's watched him for years and knows all those things about him. What did it feel for you? Because all I had to go on, I knew who he was and what he did to Brock Lesnar. I don't know anything past that, so I knew the implications in that way. But for somebody who's watched him for as long as you have, how did the debut go over for you?
I think it went fine. I think it was about as good as you can expect. I mean, I think if you're an MMA purist, you'll see the takedown of Brock Lesnar, and then you'll see him like throwing punches, and you're like, oh, those aren't good. Obviously he's doing wrestling punches instead of actual legit punches.
Sure.
So it's weird because I've used to seeing him actually really hit guys. And it's a little bit jarring, but I think it went about as well as you could expect. For comparatively versus other sports stars coming on to into WWE and making their debuts or doing whatever their one-off matches are for WrestleMania or whatever, I think that went just about as well as you could hope.
Craig, after all that, we talked about Kofi. How did the debut go over for you? Did it take away from the debut for you, or were you still like, oh, that's very interesting?
It would have been, because first of all, I had no idea who he was.
Excellent.
If the announcers hadn't said a thing,
cool.
said who he was, I would not have known. I thought they could have done a better job. It looked like he was rushed. I'm going to play Booker here. I would have had, have Ray's music play, have Ray come out with the arm in a sling, have Brock and Paul laugh at him, and then Ray hold up his finger and said, wait, and then point to the back, and then, or even have Ray with a mic, I got somebody for you. I think I'm in no shape to fight you, but somebody here is. And you bring out Cain and even have Ray introduce him, because, again, if the announcers hadn't said anything, and because I'm not the UFC guy that Chris is, I know the name Cain Velasquez very well.
Yeah.
Just didn't know what he looked like, didn't know, that I didn't know that was him, put it that way. But in all that being said, a great debut with the knee brace. I was a little, worried about that, but it put him over. Brock showing fear, put that over. So, yeah, it was a good setup. It's a shame it had to be at Kofi's expense.
I will say this, Chris. The first time that I've actually seen Brock Lesnar pull a scared face, and he actually looks scared.
He should be. I mean, Cain legit beat him hard. Now I will say it was during that period of time where Brock was going through the diverticulitis stuff.
Sure.
So it wasn't maybe 100% Brock, but no matter what, I mean, it makes complete sense that Brock showed fear, because this is a guy who he can't push around. He can't bully. He doesn't have a dramatic power advantage over. It makes complete sense. I will agree with what Craig said, though. I don't know how well it went over with the audience, because UFC, while as big as it is still kind of a fringe sport. Yeah. And while Cain was one of their big stars, I mean, he paled in comparison to like a Ronda Rousey or a Conor McGregor in terms of mainstream, name recognition. And I'm willing to bet that a large chunk of the audience in the arena had no idea who he was, other than just big Mexican dude. Right?
No, they didn't really react until he started beating the crap out of Brock Lesnar on the mat.
Yeah.
It was like, oh.
No, there's probably some smart. There's obviously probably some smart fans who knew who he was, and there was some MMA fans who knew who he was, and there is a large cross section of WWE and MMA fans. But
again, I only knew who he was because of editing the podcast and looking through pictures when I used to post on the site. So I'm like, oh yeah, I know who that is.
yeah, right. So it was a little confusing. I would agree with Craig that they probably could have introduced him better. The only thing. I was listening on when I watched it on YouTube, and it was like, okay, I know that's Cain, but why didn't they introduce him? Why you just have him come out cold? And it took like 20 seconds for Cole to even say Cain Velasquez, and I was just like, okay.
Yeah, I think they were expecting. I think from a production standpoint, they were expecting him to walk out. People know who he was, so you were going to get that loud pop where the announcers aren't supposed to talk. And then he gave it the 20 seconds for the crowd to pop, and they kind of were like, "Oh, yeah, Ray's here." and then he had to yell, "It's Cain Velasquez."
They probably overestimated that, but hey, it is what it is.
On the other side of things, Chris, Tyson Fury can cut a promo and can swing punches at a guy like Braun Strowman and make it look interesting because that segment, good old-fashioned brawl segment, things you've seen 100 times, and I was invested.
Well, I mean, this is another case of a legitimate fighter coming into a wrestling ring and throwing with these big giant superstars like Braun Strowman. It's a formula that's been done many, many times over the years on different promotions, and WWE is in fact one of those promotions that goes this well often. And but Tyson Fury is a legit champion, professional boxer. He's going to throw hands. I mean, this is like the opposite of Floyd Mayweather in that this is an actual big dude.
Yeah.
A big boxer. You don't have
to worry about you don't have to worry about Big Show if he really gets mad, just destroying him if he catches him.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, I am somewhat interested to see how this goes, although it's a little, you have to take it with a grain of salt and keep your expectations tame because it's not going to be. You expect it's not going to be a barn burner of a match.
It's not going to be pretty.
As a spectacle, it might be interesting.
Craig, you got any thoughts on Mr. Tyson Fury?
I've actually now, unlike Mr. Velasquez, I've actually seen Tyson Fury fight a couple times, and it's very impressive. Undefeated heavyweights don't grow on trees, and they don't last that long, and they're not as charismatic. Nor as tall as him. Tyson Fury is the unicorn of professional boxing, especially in the heavyweight division. I've never been a fan of boxing versus wrestling. I was burned at a young age by Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki. Since then, though, there's been a lot more pageantry involved in entertainment. So while I'm not excited at all about another boxer versus wrestler match, at least this one has a distinction of being two guys that are the same size, and Braun Strowman needs something to do.
Yeah.
So
God knows they dropped the ball on him 100 times already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep saying, and I've said it many times on this very podcast, he should be the Big Show of the next millennium. Just have him come in as not even as a special attraction. He can be a great transitional champion for someone. He could be your monster heel. He could be your monster babyface.
Yeah.
As long as he stays away from comedy like Shokishi or
Craig,
something like that.
You just said something that makes it just occurred to me when you said it. We've literally seen the guy go over 100% as both face or heel, and they've booking wise booked him into a wall 6 or 7 times since his debut, and the crowd has showed you each time that they will eat him up, and they still screw that up. And it just occurred to me, like, he's been both, and he's been both loud, and they still screwed it up.
Mm-hmm. And like Big Show when he comes out, and like even now with Strowman, like is he a face or a heel? I have no idea.
Yeah.
And even Big Show has said, I when he's walked to the curtain, do I wave or do I not? What am I today? Am I a face or a heel?
Do I frown or do I smile?
Yeah.
Chris, before you go, you have any final closing thoughts for you?
Well, I mean, I guess we're 2 weeks into this new Wednesday Night War,
Yeah,
or whatever
watching
you want to call
now.
it, or yeah. I think it's interesting that AEW came up out on top. Not necessarily surprised by that. I think AEW would probably be the more
Oh, you mean ratings wise?
ratings wise.
Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, ratings wise.
Pretty handedly too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think NXT is still NXT, and it was still a network only show, but I mean, there's plenty of interest in it, right? And I think the competition will bring out the best in at least those two shows. Things like seeing Finn Balor on NXT, I think is going to be great. I think that'll do great things for him. I think they knew how to use the Demon properly.
Yes,
they bring back the theatrical entrances for the takeovers like they used to do. I think they can make NXT really big. And AEW, I haven't had a chance to watch any of it yet, but I mean, I'm glad that they have a strong group of guys there, that they're getting more guys in, and that they're having success. I think that's only good for the wrestling fan. And I mean, I will caveat that with the normal thing I usually say when I come on here: too much wrestling on TV to watch. But when you're watching what you have to watch now, I think it's only going to improve. So I think that's great for the wrestling fan.
I will. When you come back on around Survivor Series, I will hold off the ratings questions for when you're back on later. Give it a month more to simmer and find out what the numbers are going to be, because I had a few questions, but it's really not fair to ask these questions after a week or two. So when you come back in November, which is your contractually obligated appearance by the end of the year,
yes.
We'll talk about it more then with the three of us. So
sounds good.
With that being said, sir, thank you, sir. With that being said, sir, thank you very much for coming on this week. I really appreciate you coming on last minute and giving us your thoughts about Cain Velasquez.
You're welcome, sir. It is always a pleasure to be on with you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris, where can the people follow you for your vast knowledge of UFC and other things?
You can follow me on Twitter at OmegaSquad.
And other things. What a sell that was. Chris, thank you for your patience and time.
You're welcome.
Well, I want to thank Chris again for joining us. And with that being said, I think it is now time for our time machine, that is my editing, it used to be Harry's editing, to take us back into the time machine for a segment I'd like to call Craig's Wrestling Historian.
I'd like to call it too, Daniel. I like to call it that too. Gentlemen and ladies who listen to this fine podcast of HIAC Wrestling, come back with me to a time where belts were not called titles, where territories ruled the wrestling world, and when sports entertainment was professional wrestling. We're going to go back to October 4th. A very interesting series of matches were taking place. October 4th, 1972, in Japan. On this date, October 4th, 1972, Antonio Inoki would defeat Karl Gotch. Now, for some of you who don't know Karl Gotch, you may not know the name Karl Gotch, but you've seen Karl Gotch. Because Karl Gotch, even though he was a German, born and raised, he's been credited for the popularity of Japanese wrestling and for American wrestling too. It was Karl Gotch, German, born and raised, who gave professional wrestling the suplex, the German suplex, the belly to back suplex, the bridge suplex. Every bridge you see out of a neck scissor or a hold is due to Karl Gotch. Karl Gotch has been known, and no disrespect to John Bradshaw Layfield, as the god of wrestling, because Karl Gotch, with his style not only of wrestling but his conditioning, it was Karl Gotch who brought with him he studied in Eastern cultures and Indian cultures. It was Karl Gotch that brought the Hindu squats to America, and the Hindu squats and the Hindu um, knee bends were all attributed to Karl Gotch. So, and Karl Gotch couldn't get, and I'm just turning into a drinking game now. Every time I say Karl Gotch, please take a shot, folks. But he couldn't find a lot of success in the United States. So in Japan is where he really made his name for himself. And his series of matches with Antonio Inoki were legend. Wait for it, dairy. In a time where there was no almost zero to no video exist of these matches, but still talk about in reverent terms almost 50 years later. Well, on this particular day, Antonio Inoki defeated Karl Gotch for the New Japan Real World Heavyweight Championship in Tokyo. This would be one of only 2 title changes, because Karl Gotch would win the belt back later in the month. And this belt pretty much existed solely for the purpose of Karl Gotch and Antonio Inoki matches. Okay, which I always found fascinating, and I always thought, that type of belt could be used for other great wrestling rivalries. The Rey Mysterio Psychosis belt could be a belt just for those two. The Ricky Steamboat Ric Flair belt, just for those two, or the Eddie Guerrero versus Dean Malenko ECW Real World Championship belt would have been perfect just for those two. So the Antonio Inoki Karl Gotch wrestled for the New Japan Real World Heavyweight title October 4th, 1972. October 4th, 1981 was a big day in NWA wrestling history because a month earlier, Wahoo McDaniel had finally ended the 9-month title reign of Roddy Piper, and but he would be attacked by Abdullah the Butcher, Roddy Piper's paid assassin, and he would be incapacitated and unable to defend his United States Championship. So there was a huge tournament in the NWA to crown a new United States champion. It took place in the Charlotte Coliseum, and no less than 5 Hall of Famers took place in this tournament. And it was won. The finals were Sergeant Slaughter and Ricky Steamboat, and Sergeant Slaughter would defeat Ricky Steamboat for the United States heavyweight title. This match and the title would legitimize Sergeant Slaughter, because up until then, Sergeant Slaughter's biggest and its only national exposure was in the WWF for his title matches against Bob Backlund and his boot camp street fight with Pat Patterson. These feuds put Sergeant Slaughter on the map in the national sense, but unless you lived in the Northeast, you didn't see these matches. So Sergeant Slaughter made his reputation based on what he did in New York, up north. So when he came to the NWA, it was his popularity and his heel just came from what he did in the WWF. So when he won this prestigious NWA United States title, beating an NWA mainstay like Ricky Steamboat, that not only was Sergeant Slaughter's first ever singles title, but that's what legitimized him in both companies. So when Sergeant Slaughter would leave the NWA, when he would go back to the WWF 3 years later and begin one of the biggest face turns in pro wrestling history, that would set his career. But if it wasn't for this win over Ricky Steamboat, winning the United States Championship, United States title in a huge tournament, that's what put Sergeant Slaughter on the map, and it pretty much made his career. October 4th, 1991, Eddie Gilbert, the late great Eddie Gilbert, would defeat someone named the Handsome Stranger for the Global Wrestling Federation television title. Exactly 2 years later, Too Cold Scorpio and that handsome stranger, Marcus Alexander Bagwell, would defeat the Nasty Boys for the WCW Tag Team Championship. So 2 years earlier, Marcus Alexander Bagwell was wrestling under a Lone Ranger mask as a handsome stranger. 2 years later, he's one half of the WCW Tag Team Champions with Too Cold Scorpio.
Buff Bagwell still has one of my favorite easy, cheap heat pops ever in the history. And whenever we bring up Buff, I will never not mention this, is deep in the Monday Night Wars in 1998. They're in Wichita, Kansas, and it's when him and Scott Steiner paired up. It's when they were sent up at the end of the top of either the 9 o'clock or the 10 o'clock hour just to kill about 10, 15 minutes, whether there was a match involved or not. And they go out, they do the 2-minute typical NWO entrance where they talk and pose. Buff gets, they get booed. The music finally cuts. Buff grabs the mic and he just goes, "We don't like Wichita." Boo! Shut up! Shut up! And he just hands the mic to Scott Steiner, and then that was it. They were off.
I remember that.
Oh God, I can't wait to get to that because, as you know, I'm rewatching all the Monday night stuff. Well, I'm watching wrestling in chronological order, and I'm in '96. But I'm starting to record this stuff just to post like 15, 30-second clips on Twitter and Facebook, and I can't wait to get to that because I'm gonna upload that one to YouTube and link it to WWE Network. It's one of my favorite. It's just so cheap. It's so damn funny.
Well, like you can't talk about Marcus Alexander Bagwell Buff without mentioning that. I can't ever talk about Marcus Alexander Bagwell Buff without mentioning him as one of the stupidest, most embarrassing injuries in pro wrestling history.
Yeah.
Marcus Alexander Bagwell, folks, for those of you who don't know, was a huge fan of Sting, looked up to Sting, even though they're pretty much the same age and they broke in together. But
my God, I forgot that.
He wanted to be like Sting so much, and he wore tights like Sting. But Marcus Alexander was incredibly vain, but he thought his legs looked too skinny compared to Sting's. So Marcus Alexander Bagwell went out and got himself calf implants to make his legs look bigger.
This is breaking news to me.
You didn't know this?
No.
Dan, this man, prefaces, I say, one of the stupidest, worst, most embarrassing injuries in wrestling history.
Yeah.
Buff Bagwell, this is when he was still a face, thought his legs looked too skinny. So he went out and got himself calf implants to make his legs bigger.
Yeah.
Problem was the implants got infected. So Marcus Alexander Bagwell couldn't walk for 2 months. So they were removed.
Jesus Christ. Who looked at Sting's legs and goes, "Mine are skinnier"? I mean, come on.
But why are you comparing your legs to Sting? I mean, Marcus had a fine body, upper body.
Why are you, as Marcus Alexander Bagwell, comparing anything you do to Sting? Ever. Sorry.
That was his idol. That was his man. But he thought his legs looked too skinny on television. So he got himself calf implants. Those implants got infected. And he was off the road for 2 months because he physically could not walk until the implants were removed from his legs, and he was laid up in a hospital and then at home. So
things I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's one of the. I always put him and Rey Mysterio is in the worst, most embarrassing quote unquote injury. Rey would right before he started getting tatted up, he pierced his belly button and that got infected, and so he had to wrestle. I don't know if you remember, Rey had to wear big giant Band-Aid over his midriff, and that's when he started with the bodysuits to cover it up. But yeah, he got his belly button pierced, and that got infected.
Didn't know all that either. That's all news to me.
Yeah. So yeah, that's your Marcus Alexander Bagwell tidbit for this particular segment of Pro Wrestling Historians.
Thank God.
Moving on. Unfortunately, the news gets worse. We're going to October 5th, 1997, which was a bad day in the history of professional wrestling. October 5th, the afternoon of October 5th, 1997, we lost Brian Pillman.
Ah.
He was found dead in his hotel room. And sad that it was. Even sadder was that same night was the Bad Blood pay-per-view. And Vince McMahon himself broke the news to the crowd that Brian Pillman was gone. But the show must go on. And that particular show did. And it was a memorable show. You look at the crowd, and you look at the card, and you see how in love the WWE was with factions back then, because you had the Nation of Domination over the Legion of Doom. Turned out to be a handicap match. Ken Shamrock was supposed to join Hawk and Animal, but he had an upper respiratory infection, so he was out. DOA defeated Los Boricuas.
DOA.
Yeah. The Godwins defeated the Headbangers for the WWF Tag Team Who the Hell Cares category.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how low it was on the card, because you had other tag team matches. Like I said, the Nation over LOD, DOA over Los Boricuas. Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith, the heels, would defeat the face team of Vader and the Patriot.
Okay. Why not?
Yeah, but the tag team titles changed hands in like the second or third match there. And the main event, still memorable to this day, Shawn Michaels defeated The Undertaker in a Hell in a Cell match. The first Hell in a Cell match. Shawn Michaels defeated The Undertaker, thanks in no small part to the debut of Kane.
Man, wow. What a confluence of history making and pro. I mean, Brian Pillman's death was history making.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it a couple episodes ago. As I watch another great who was ahead of his time at the time, Tully Blanchard, come out to the ring with Shawn Spears on AEW Dynamite, which, again, I want to put over how awesome that is. Brian Pillman was... Think of all your favorite wrestlers, even mine. I'll even take Sting. Because, it's like Phil Collins. We talk about music. Phil Collins is my go-to. He always will be, and I'll fight to the death for that, as I would for Sting. There was nobody better at the time in the mid-90s, nobody hotter, very few, than Brian Pillman. And he was groundbreaking. And it was, maybe that's why somebody dying that young is still shocking, but I think that's why it, like another person we're going to be talking about in a little while, hits you like that, because it was very like, Jesus, we were just talking about him 5 minutes ago, like that kind of thing. It was so jarring at the time. This wasn't somebody that was away from the business, and then all of a sudden, he's been retired for 10 years and he passed away, and it was just so jarring that I still remember that. And then we cut to the end of that that day, where you have, everybody talks about Mick Foley falling off the cage, but you have the match that broke the mold with, until we talk about it later on, Hell in a Cell match, which is a damn good Hell in a Cell match. I think my second favorite over the Foley Undertaker one. Foley Undertaker is more for shock value, because how Mick Foley's still alive, I don't understand. But this was a damn good fight. this was two guys that beat the Holy, more so Undertaker on Shawn. And then you had the debut of Kane at the end of it, which is, again, history making in the world of professional wrestling. That's a hell of a day right there, alone on those merits, unfortunate and fortunately.
Yeah, that was a hell of a day, hell of a 24 hours in professional wrestling. But like I said, Dan, this particular day was it was a sad day, not just for that. That happened. We lost Brian Pillman and bad blood later on that day. But 2 years later, on that exact same day, Dan, October 5th, 1999, Darren Drozdoff was paralyzed in a match against D'Lo Brown.
Ugh.
Same day.
That's one of those tapes that's deep in the vault of the WWF that you will never see. Rumored to be alongside the B-roll footage of Owen Hart from the hard cams that we're recording, is the full-on recording of this match. And the, what was the D'Lo, what was it called? The D'Lo bomb, or?
He was going for a Tiger Bomb. He was,
Tiger Bomb.
Yeah, it was going to be a running sit-out Tiger Bomb, Power Bomb. D'Lo had him up. People who were there say that, that he slipped or that it was a slippery mat because of the sweat. D'Lo, to his credit, never blamed the mat, never blamed anyone else. His words were very matter of fact. I thought I had him, and I didn't. And Darren Drozdoff, exactly 20 years later, still has no hard feelings towards D'Lo. It's part of the business. He ironically enough, he sounded a lot like Bruno Sammartino when he got his neck broken by accident by Stan Hansen. He never had any hard feelings towards Stan. Stan obviously, admittedly, was broken up about it. D'Lo obviously incredibly shattered with it, shattered about it. I don't think his career ever recovered after that, even though everyone, to a man, loved D'Lo. Everyone from Triple H to Rock, to Stone Cold, back when those 1-800 commercials came out, he wanted to work with D'Lo, and they had a great commercial because everyone liked D'Lo. Generally, one of the great guys in professional wrestling, and there's not a lot of them. Still is, yeah. You can count on maybe one or two hands. I mean, the genuine good guys there are. D'Lo was one of them. He just got a raw deal. An accident that could have happened to anybody. Unfortunately, it happened to D'Lo and Darren Drozdoff. And you mentioned Owen Hart earlier. This happened about 2 months after what happened to Owen. So professional wrestling was already seen in an incredibly negative light. Still hadn't fully recovered from the death of Owen, and then this happens. So where with Owen, no one knows exactly what happened, and no one knew exactly who to blame. With D'Lo, everyone knew exactly what happened, and everyone knew exactly who to blame. And unfortunately, it was him. Unfortunate for both of them.
He took it like a man, though. Man, there was never, and again, it's crazy. You say that, and there was never a bad word I've ever heard about D'Lo Brown. Never, even after that. And if it had happened during the days of social media, like other in-ring incidents, I'll just say it like that, you'd be quick to the armchair bookers and corporate sponsors of the company would be quick to you. I've never heard anything other than that. I effed up, like you said. I thought I had him, and I also agree, man. He's so underrated. D'Lo was so good for his limited capacity on a card usage. Take it away, Craig. It's a shame it had to a nice guy. It couldn't happen.
Yeah, to quote the late great Buddy Rogers. D'Lo was the first wrestler to ever hold the European and Intercontinental titles at the same time.
I also liked that he wore the rib protector for about a year and a half too long, like the Roddy Piper in the Cast.
Yeah, Bob Orton in the Cast, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry about
Yeah.
you know.
Well, Dan Severn legitimately separated his muscle in his chest during a submission match, and so that was yeah, he did have a legitimate injury, but like you said, he wore the chest protector a lot longer than he should have, and that just became part of the D'Lo outfit after that. But yes, October 5th was it's a dark day in professional wrestling. We'll just leave it at that. October 6th, though, was a particularly I'm going to concentrate on October 6th, 1985, Dan. This may have been one of, if not the biggest, busiest days in wrestling history. The I remember this because I remember watching it. Now I went to college in Florida, but this match was televised in Florida. It was the world class Cotton Bowl extravaganza in the Cotton Bowl in Texas. He had 25,117 folks. See the main event. Kevin and Kerry Von Erich would defeat Chris Adams, Gentleman Chris Adams, and Gino Hernandez in a hair versus hair match. It was made popular in the dark side of the ring. You might have seen clips of it during Gino Hernandez's segment, and also in the Von Erich segment, because Gino, after losing the match, didn't want to get his head shaved, so he ran away. But he was tackled by the youngest Von Erich, Chris, who tackled him, and that was more or less his pro wrestling debut. And I just remember every time I look at the Cotton Bowl matches, or this one in particular, October 6th, 1985, just look at the fans. I mean, they're jumping up and down, they're standing, they're cheering after the match is over, or during for the whole thing. Also remember that match, that card, because making her return to the area by a helicopter was Sunshine, who was a big star in world class, and in years prior to that, she was Jimmy Garvin's valet before she got into a feud with Jimmy Garvin's other valet, who would turn out to be his wife, Precious. But Sunshine became a face and was a big part of world class during its formative years. But she returned by a helicopter, and got a huge pop from the fans. So that took place in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl, 25,000. But on that same day, there was a huge card in the AWA in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the WWF had 3 shows that day, one in Boston, one in Phoenix, and one in Miami.
Jesus.
All on the same day. 1985 was a height of popularity in professional wrestling, because all these cards that I mentioned drew in excess of 10,000 people.
Jesus Christ.
In the world class, in AWA, and the WWF. The Boston match was headlined by Hulk Hogan versus Roddy Piper. The Phoenix match was headlined by Tito Santana versus Randy Savage, the Intercontinental title. And the Miami one was headlined by Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo against Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake. So all that took place October 6th, 1985.
That's why, and I try not to mention Jim Cornette because it brings up a lot of feelings on certain things he said recently, and it's something I don't feel like getting into. And he always is taken out of context when he says wrestling is not as big as it used to be. And that's just factually, because you said 4 or 5 shows on the same day, running concurrently, drawing over 10,000. Does not happen anymore. Period.
No.
Jim is not taking a shot. I mean, he does when he says he doesn't like modern wrestling, and I disagree with him on about 96% of how he feels about professional wrestling today. Well, on the very basis of his, the guy's a historian. He's the historian other than you in my life, Craig. Literally, wrestling is not as big as it used to be. And I wasn't going to touch upon this because, again, I want to wait till Chris comes back on in November to talk about where we are since this started in October with all these shows running. look at the ratings last week, and I'm just going to mention it, and then you can follow up and then continue on with the story. And yes, AEW beat NXT, but it was 1 point some odd million versus 900,000. Now look at the ratings of wrestling in the 80s through up to the Monday Night Wars and right after. It is not as big as it used to be, and I'll go further into that discussion in November in an upcoming episode on how I don't think it ever will be again. And I love I love that these companies are running, but you just look at the numbers like that's great, but it tain't what it used to be.
Not indeed. And like I said, on this date, 1985, world class AWA in 3 different shows for the WWF, all did over 10,000. So all looking at over $100,000 gates, and to adjust that for inflation, what that would be in today's market compared with the dollar was in 1985. To if that same thing were to happen right now, yes. And I didn't even mention the NWA cards that were undoubtedly going on that same day.
They
But
had 10 shows almost.
yeah. And speaking of the television, Dan, it was on October 6th that the Saturday night's main event aired. And it was the one where Hulk Hogan against Paul Orndorff, and where Roddy Piper turned face. He's when he legitimately separated the shoulder of Adrian Adonis when he came to the ring with the crutch. This was after Piper had been attacked on the Piper's Pit by Adrian Adonis and Bob Orton. He was supposed to have a match with Iron Sheik, and Pedro Morales took his place, and Piper came to the ring hobbling with a crutch, told Morales to leave, and then broke the crutch over the back of the Iron Sheik that left 2 parallel welts on his back for the rest of the match. But Hogan went to hit Piper, and he didn't, and that's what started the Hogan Piper team, or the relationship. But that Saturday night's main event did a 7.8 share.
Oh my God. And thus proving my point further. My God.
Yeah. Also on this date, the final thing that happened October 6th was the birth of my favorite wrestler of all time. Bruno would have been 84 on October 6th. Which brings us to today. What you said about Brian Pillman, you have your favorite wrestler, but for your money, there was nobody better at the time, during his time, than Brian Pillman. I feel the exact same. I feel the exact same way about the wrestler that was born today. There was no one during his time that I admired more than this man. He was my favorite wrestler at the time of his death, and the fact that he's still being referred to. I know we're going to talk about. We didn't talk about it a week ago, or when Rey Mysterio was attacked. If any sharp-eyed fan saw what he was wearing a purple jacket that said Halloween Havoc on it. One side said Mysterio, the other side said Guerrero, to commemorate what I still consider. And Eddie, even out of his mouth, said if there were all the matches, if there's one thing he would never change, it would be the Rey Mysterio Eddie Guerrero match at Halloween Havoc. Absolute perfection. Today would have been Eddie Guerrero's 52nd birthday, and he was paid tribute to. Even today, if you're watching AEW Dynamite, one of Chris Jericho's his inner circle that he's calling it now, did a tribute to Eddie. Great name. I'm really surprised that hasn't been used yet, Dan, to this point.
Yeah.
But
No idea.
Yeah, Eddie Guerrero's influence is still seen far and wide. To everyone from Batista to Ray to Dominic, his son, not Eddie's son.
Kayfabe.
and kayfabe, far-reaching. Yeah, he was my favorite wrestler at the time of his death, and no one. I always put Eddie when I talk about the greatest superstars of all time, and I don't like to say wrestlers, but if we're talking WWE superstars of all time, Eddie Guerrero is always in my top 5. I always put him way ahead of the Undertaker because Undertaker's not even in my top 10 because Eddie did more for professional wrestling than anyone I've seen as a face, as a heel. Um, he always got the crowd behind him, against him. He had just that charisma before the lie, the cheat, and the steal. When Eddie would come down in WCW, did the same thing as a face or a heel. Guy was just over. When he was a heel, he'd come down to the ring with that stringy hair, and he would just pick one audience member. It didn't matter who it was. Every week, he just stare at him. Just give him just the meanest mug and just.
My favorite when he would do the little lip thing sometimes.
Yeah, and every week he just picked one fan. Didn't matter where it was or who it was. It could be up in the crowd. It could just be at the railing. He'd mutter something and just just walk away. And like I said earlier, I mentioned Antonio Inoki and Carl Gotch. They had their own belt. They traded with each other. The Eddie Guerrero Dean Malenko match is still, speaking of top 5, greatest rivalries in professional wrestling history, right up there with Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair and the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express. Wrestling does not get any better than Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero. Those three, in terms of feuds. But Eddie Guerrero would have been 52 today. He was my favorite wrestler at the time of his passing. He was still one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. No one's ever done it like him. No one will ever do it like him.
Nope.
It copied Leo Rush, as we're taping this, won the NXT Cruiserweight Championship with a frog splash that would have made Eddie very proud. But it was Eddie's frog splash that, bringing it to United States, to ECW, that made it what it is today. Again, far-reaching. What Eddie Guerrero has done for professional wrestling cannot be touched or matched ever. But he would have been 52 years old today. Happy birthday, Eddie.
I don't think I'm going to add on to that, man. You said it perfectly. There's no need for me to. Just know that any words that Craig and I would ever say about Eddie Guerrero doesn't do it justice.
Not at all. And that, my friends, is what Dan likes to call the wrestling historian.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into the big discussion about my favorite show this week, and I truly mean that, and I'm not just saying that to appease the old school fans. We'll talk about that in a second, but I do want to address the I don't want to say HIAC because we're HIAC. That was Hell in a Cell. I want to address the end of Hell in a Cell. I thought the show was good. I thought it was a good show until the end of that match. Now, I don't care that it ended because referee stoppage. I don't care that it ended. It was referee stoppage, folks. Nobody ever said DQ. Twitter said it was DQ. It was a goddamn referee stoppage. Stop being stupid and calm down and wait for a reaction for something. Christ's sake. But I still didn't like that ending. I still don't understand why it happened. Was it the worst? I'm sorry. I know it sounds like I'm just going, oh no, just WWE apology. I have seen worse. I don't know how else to tell you this. Everybody's saying that's the worst thing. First of all, nobody cares that you're canceling the WWE network. Just cancel it if you're going to cancel it, because most of you were still all there for Raw, so whatever. The ratings were down, but you also got playoffs baseball. So until I see the ratings continue to tumble, you're all still watching because you're all still talking about it on Twitter. Nobody cares about that. Still not the worst thing I've ever seen in wrestling. You have no idea what the worst is. You just haven't yet. It just stop it. Stop it with your melodramatic bull crap. I didn't like the ending still. I still don't understand why the match happened. You even alluded to this 2 weeks ago, I think. You said, why is Bray Wyatt even bothering with the title? I really think you said that. I believe you did. Why is Bray Wyatt in this character bothering with the title? Why does he care? And based off, and I agreed on it. It didn't occur to me till you said it. It didn't need to happen. It didn't need to happen. Considering the woman's Hell in a Cell was good. The rest of the show up to that point was a fine show. And you just got that jumbled mess at the end it did take me out of it. Do I think it's the worst thing ever? No, but it kind of was like, well, I don't care now. How did you feel? What's your perspective?
On the Hell in a Cell match, on the Hell in a Cell card, or just that match in particular?
Well, the card as a whole, and then
I thought that
match.
The card as a whole was fine. I thought it was a B+ show. I thought the last match is what kept it from being an A. Everything else about it was wonderful. Sasha and Becky, Sasha being a pro at the Hell in a Cell, did exactly what you would expect. There's a reason why Sasha has been the common denominator when it comes to women Hell in a Cell matches, because she knows what she's doing and she's tough, and they both are. That was great. I have to remind folks, people were crying over the ending, and not a couple of people weren't happy about the fact that Asuka is a heel now. But I have to remind folks, the name of the tag team was Kabuki Warriors. If you're a wrestling fan at all, you know anything about Kabuki, you had to know the Green Mist was coming at some point. I mean, come on.
Hold on. Do you remember a year ago when they debuted as the Kabuki Warriors? I came on the show and I mentioned how I was literally added to a wrestling group, and like an hour after I was added to this group that I did not ask to be part of, I was asked to join. I saw a post from a woman that said this is racist and it's stupid, and I went in there and I said, it's not racist. There's no racial connotation. There's no racist connotation in the words Kabuki Warriors. It's literally how they're dressed traditionally, how they're acting with the face paint and her mask. That's literally what she is. No, don't tell me, white boy, it's racist. And I was like, oh, as a white man, I'm just going to step out of this one because I have no leg to stand on. And a year later, they're still Kabuki Warriors. And they literally, like you said, the Green Mist. And as soon as I saw that, I thought of that woman going, I'm sure it's still racist somewhere. It's a great gimmick, and they're champions.
Yeah. Finally.
Help me, Craig.
So in that particular sense, the card was great up to then, great, well received. I agree with what one person said about, if you didn't want the Fiend to be champion, there's other ways to not have him be champion. Other than that was the idea, and I could see both ways. But obviously, you want to keep Seth strong.
Sure.
You have him go over as champion. You want to keep the Fiend strong. Don't have him win, but keep him. Or either that or make him champion. It was just that, and honestly, Dan, because I have my Sunday night viewing, I was trying to watch both, and Walking Dead and Succession and Ballers and Amazing Gemstones on HBO. Yeah, but I didn't. But I heard more from the outcry than I did the actual match. It's like the people that didn't see Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction. I didn't see it. All I did was hear about it. I didn't see it, but I just everyone heard about it, and that's the only way.
That's the thing. I forgot to tell this part of the story. I was at Madison Square Garden watching Phil Collins.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time the show's over and I'm on the transit train to get home back to Jersey, to get back to Jersey to then go home, all I'm reading is how it's the worst thing they've ever seen, and this is disgusting, and I'm canceling the WWE Network, to the part where when I finally watched the show's great, and I get to that match and I'm just like, well, I mean, it's stupid. I don't care, but I'm not like the worst ever. What are you? People tell me I'm always off the hinge, and I'm always kind of out there, but I would like to know what planet other people are on where I saw the worst thing ever. Because I saw a stupid ending and I saw a stupid match that shouldn't have happened in the first place, but worst ever. I don't know.
You know, they've obviously never seen a Linda Miles Jackie Gator match, so that's not the worst thing ever.
That's from our memory.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, everything else was great up till then, and it wasn't, and I just heard that. I didn't see it either. Or when I looked up, it was over, but I just heard nothing. But what I did see, I had it on mute. The chairs, sledgehammer on top of a non-moving Fiend, and the referee stopping it, and I guess the match was over. I didn't see a pinfall. I just saw the credits go up, so I said, I guess something happened. But there was no clear-cut winner. But it's done. Genie's out of the bottle. Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So
back in that bag.
Yeah. Yes, I'm saying everything except it is what it is, because if one more person said this, I probably will commit a homicide, because I honestly detest that statement. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I won't say it.
Yeah. Our favorite radio show had a segment on the things that, what are the worst sounds that humans make, and
that,
that.
It's what it is. Yes, it is, idiot. Now, what's your point? I get you.
And and so many people I know don't even realize they're saying it. It's like, oh my God, you know how many times you said that just in one sentence. But anyway, and I'm sure we'll be saying this a week from today, because we have the draft coming up. So there's more discussion. But we'll go from the bad to the actual good, because I know Hell in a Cell and Monday Night Raw weren't your favorite shows of the week, but you did have a favorite show, a favorite wrestling show this week, did you not?
I'm just flustered by how good that segue was, and I know you're good at segues because you're also a professional and you do this every week. But I'm just thank you, Craig. Thank you. To be honest, NWA Power, and because of our I can't ever think of the word feedback. That's it. It's a hard word. 2 syllables, 8 letters, idiot. We get off of YouTube. I started, but I mean, I was paying and any other regular listener of the show knows I've been talking about the NWA since their reinception, as I'm calling it. But to be honest, I was a little skeptical when they announced that they were going to do it the old way. I'm like, there's no way it's going to feel the same. There's no way in hell it's going to sound, look. It did. It did. For those who don't know, NWA Power airs on Facebook and YouTube. No restrictions to anywhere in the world. 6:05 Eastern. I love the 6:05 start time. And they did. They had a little timer countdown to 6:05. And at 6:05, boom, intro on. They got Dokken for the intro, sir, which is a little. I was like, well, that's Dokken. And it looked like. It's weird. It looked like that they had, because it's not the same set. They build everything up new. It looked like they had the set sitting in mothballs for 30 years and decided to whip them out and paint them and fix them up a little bit so they're presentable in HD, put the ring back in there and do the show. It came off exactly like an old 80s or late 70s, early 80s studio NWA Memphis television show felt. It really did. The sound, the crowd mixed in with the promos, the unscripted promos. Jim Cornette and Joe Galley sounded fantastic. It's not like Jim hasn't been down this road before. And it felt like it was an hour. It was over. You had the job matches and you had the great match at the end. Tim Storm was defeated by Nick Aldis. Nick Aldis retained his title, and in that win, the stipulation was that Tim Storm could never challenge for the NWA title again. And you can say, anybody listening to this who's been watching the NWA since they came back, since Billy bought it, and brought it back into the forefront. I will say forefront because they're in the discussions. We're discussing it now. That Tim Storm made that title feel important again. And he did. And Nick Aldis has taken it back to that step beyond where it's one of the main titles in discussions on all the podcasts like this one, the blogs, Twitter, everybody's talking about it again. If you have not seen, and I know there's one listener in particular, his name's Darren, who also supports us on Obey the Puck. I hope he has seen it because we discuss about it all the time. He agrees with Jim Cornette about modern day wrestling, and I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. That's his perspective. That's not. How dare you? You're allowed to have that opinion as long as you're not hurting with anybody. You're anybody with your opinion or oppressing or trying to exterminate somebody's way of life because you disagree with them. Have your opinion. That's going for another discussion for another time, Craig. I can't wait for your reply to this. I hope you liked the show because if you say, "Well, I hated it," I'm going to really feel bad. I really hope he watched it because I think this is what somebody like him is looking for. You have the guys who are wrestling today having the wrestling matches that you would have today. You're having it in that old school format, quick, and then a long main event, traditional in a little studio. And it's not too flashy. It's not too off the wall insane. Good old fashioned studio wrestling. I legitimately thought that was my favorite show of the last week. And maybe it's because I set my expectations low, like they're never going to capture that feeling of Saturday night at 6:05 on TBS ever again. And by God, they did. I have one complaint. I hate the lower third. I hate the graphics on the lower third. I don't think they look old enough. Other than that, we'll see how it goes. They've taped 8 shows, so you got 7 left, and they're reconvening at the studios in December to do a bunch more. So they got something going right now. And, Craig, by God, I hope you enjoyed these shows because I just put it over.
Well, far be it for me to tear down what you've just built up.
Go ahead.
So finally, Dan. No, I enjoyed the show. Obviously, since this was completely from my era, so it was like, it was weird watching it, Dan, because I'm so used to watching it in black and white. So that set, the ring, the flags in the back, the small studio crowd, it was it had a great feel to it. It was great to watch, guys go out unscripted, do their thing. Nick Aldis, if there was ever going to be resurgence of the NWA, and I've mentioned this since I've been a part of this fine podcast, it's something I never thought I would see. I thought the NWA has been on a lifeline circling the drain for many, many years. But if the NWA was ever going to have a resurgence, they could not have picked a better man to be the champion at the time of its resurgence than Nick Aldis. I'm so glad he dropped the Magnus thing. Ever since I first was introduced to him in TNA, I always thought he had a great look. I always thought he had a great body. I thought his biggest success was going to be when they finally put him in the main event Mafia. I think, oh, finally they're recognizing how good this guy really is, and how he does have everything. The look, the body, and he can go, and he's looks like a champion. Him being NWA champion is the best thing for the NWA. And his match with Tim Storm, which they did a great job of telling the backstory. Part of it that took place right here in Philadelphia at the ECW Arena during the 10 pounds of gold segment, which, again, fans, do yourself a favor. Check out 10 pounds of gold.
Absolutely.
Also available on YouTube, just if you're a fan of professional wrestling. And anytime you get to hear Jim Cornette, it's always great on the mic. And I couldn't, not gonna trash it, can't trash it, wouldn't say anything bad about NWA, except Austin Idol. And it's like, I know everything, like everything to be old. Just seeing Austin Idol now just kind of makes me sad. I'm glad they brought him back.
I understand what you're coming from, though. Yeah, that commercial is hilarious, though.
Yeah. That being said, Dan, okay, as much as it's like I like everything but Austin Idol. Had that have been Tommy Rich, I would have completely changed everything. That would have made it the greatest thing. That would have made it the greatest show of the week.
Okay, I got you. All right, fair
Remember I
enough.
said something about NWA? Yeah.
Promotional consideration paid more for the following. I was dying. It's like, this is the most absurd goddamn commercial I've ever seen. Just to comment on Nick Aldis for a second. He wrestled for us. The end of Nova Pro kind of jumbles up in my mind, so I don't know if it was a year or two ago. He wrestled against. Oh my! If you could find this match, I can't remember what show it was on for Nova Pro, but it was Isaiah Frazier versus Nick Aldis for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. The match was incredible. It was an incredible match. But Nick Aldis carries himself. And maybe it's just because when he walks through the door, he knows he's being watched. But when you see Nick Aldis, you get Nick Aldis. Very classy, very gentlemanly, even though he's kind of technically a heel. He's not cocky in that way, unless you're interacting with him as another wrestler. But Nick Aldis is class all the way, as the NWA World's Heavyweight title should be.
Yeah, and it's a shame that not a shame, but when you see you see a wrestler with that belt wearing a suit, you automatically it comes to mind Ric Flair. Ric Flair was the first guy to wearing a suit like that, and but to me, Nick Aldis and Ric Flair will even say this. He reminds me of a young Nick Bockwinkel. That same type of eloquence with the suit. I mean, obviously the suit you associate with Ric Flair, but to me, Nick Aldis is a Nick Bockwinkel, and Ric Flair even credited because Nick Bockwinkel was champion right when Ric Flair was breaking in, and Nick Bockwinkel was the first world heavyweight champion to come out wearing suits and talking about how great he was and how much better he was than everyone else. So Ric Flair wearing the suit was he got from Nick Bockwinkel, and that's who Nick Aldis reminds me of. And I can't think of a better. If you're going to exemplify a classic world champion, it was Nick Bockwinkel first, everyone else after that.
We need to do a podcast about Nick Bockwinkel because I don't think, in general, around the world, he got enough press when he passed.
He didn't.
And we spoke about him for about 20, 25 minutes, but I think one day we just need to do a Botcast. Because Bockwinkel was amazing.
That he was.
He walks into the room, it was that's Nick Bockwinkel right there. Holy Jesus.
Yeah, and incredibly influential. Like I said, it was Ric Flair saw Nick Bockwinkel, and again because Rick grew up in Minnesota. When Nick Bockwinkel was the AWA heavyweight champion, it was when Flair was first breaking in. So, and again, the NWA champion was Jack Briscoe, was our Harley Race, Dory Funk. The WWF champion was Bruno Sammartino. They never came out with this platinum blonde hair, wearing suits, and they definitely didn't have the greatest manager of all time, Bobby Heenan, in their corner as well. So Nick Bockwinkel was an incredibly influential wrestler of his time, and Nick Aldis. If you're going to compare anyone to for a world champion class, it's Nick Bockwinkel. Nothing against Ric Flair. Ric Flair had his own style. Ric Flair had his own professionalism when it came to being a world champion with class, but he got it from Nick Bockwinkel. Nick Bockwinkel did it first. Nick Aldis is doing it last.
Before we go, you have a bit of wrestling news to share about yourself, don't you?
I do?
Yes, you're officially back on the announcing call, aren't you?
I was contacted by the great Brady Hicks, and we will be doing commentary.
That, by the way,
for Super Crazy Pro Wrestling. We won't be able to attend the show, unfortunately, but we will be calling the match when the match is available on DVD.
Nice.
So yes, I will be back behind behind the mic one more time at behest of the great Brady Hicks. He asked, I said yes, and here we are. So yes, thank you for bringing it to my attention, Dan. And you think like, am I going back in the ring? Am I donning the tights?
No, God, no. I was just very happy to see that. Just remember who broke in.
It was you.
I don't care. I'm kidding. Jesus Christ. With that being said, what else do you have coming down the pipe, and where can the people follow you? No sex jokes.
Okay, well then I have nothing coming down the pipe. As far as the pipe goes, you can catch my other podcast where I talk about comic book stuff. I'll be doing my complete, full spoiler-filled review of the Joker movie. Ooh. On upcoming Comic Book Gurus podcast. I'm gonna get all the good and the bad out there because there's people that did not like this movie, and so I'm getting their opinions and the pros and the cons. So there's that, and other than that, you can find me on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Craig Ligons, CraigLiggeons.
Before I go, I just want to say AEW just teased a turn against Cody Rhodes from MJF, and MJF stuck by him. It was beautifully done. He really thought he was going to hit Cody Rhodes, and he just beat the holy hell out of the Inner Circle before getting taken out himself. That was very good.
It was great. And it was going on as I was talking, Dan, so I didn't want to say, and by the way.
Yeah, no, I was getting ready to break in because I was watching going,
I'm still loyal. I said, but you know what I was thinking, Dan? I said, it's too early. I still think it's coming, but
sure.
It's too early.
With that being said, sorry, Greg, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but again, it's just great to see MJF on TV. He should be on television a lot more.
We both should be on television a lot more. I just want to say that. But since we're not on television, you can follow me on Twitter at Daniel83. The HIAC Talk Radio Network is on all social media platforms. Like that segue was good too. At all social media platforms, HIAC Talk Radio, part of the VOC Nation Radio Network. Go to thebradyhicks.com. Go to other programs and look up Obey the Puck, Stadium Journey, and of course, HIAC Talk Radio. Our own website.com will be up again soon because I talked to the man in charge, the guru of HIAC Talk Radio, the one Dean Dixon, and it will be coming back. Harry Barnett, send all your hate mail to at Craig Ligons because I did not call him great. He is, but Brady Hicks, that's you guys. That's got nothing to do with me, and I'll be muting all those conversations on Twitter. We'll be back next week. For Craig Ligons, I am awesome. See you next week. Goodbye.